After a humiliating defeat in World War I, the uninvited guest of democracy replaces the last emperor of Germany, and the country is thrown into political turmoil. But what events exactly led to Hitler coming into power? This is the Weimar Republic. Near the end of World War I, Wilson stated that he would only associate with a democratic Germany since, after all, to him this was a crusade for democracy. So to accept his 14 points for peace and the war's end, Kaiser was kicked out of the country and the Weimar National Assembly was created. This assembly created a new constitution for Germany and transitioned the country into a federal republic. And on November 11, 1918, Germany surrendered World War I. This was the first ever democracy in Germany, and the National Assembly designed it to blend the European parliamentary system with the American presidential system. After this new constitution was written, the government of Germany was completely different. Basically, it had the basic body of government, or parliament, which could make laws, government budget, ratify international treaties, and declare war. There were two parts of parliament, the first part being the Reichstag, or the lower house. It was elected every 4 years and it represented the people, by proportional representation, sort of like the House of Representatives in the United States. The second part was the Reichsrat, or the upper house. This was where the federal state reps were. It's sort of like the Senate, or the House of Lords in England. Then there was the president. He was elected by the people every 7 years, was the head of the state, controlled the army, can dissolve parliament, appoint judges and chancellor, and can make laws without the consent of parliament in a time of emergency, which is very dangerous since it's basically what a dictator can do. Finally, there is the Chancellor, who is the head of the government and reports to the Reichstag in Parliament, and underneath whom is the Cabinet. The first president of the Weimar Republic was Friedrich Ebert, while the first Chancellor of the Republic was Philipp Scheidemann. A large source of conflict in the Weimar Republic was the fact that the people were divided into two major groups, the left and right wings. The left wing was for equality, give the power to the worker, abolish private property. It was just a group of socialists and the extremists being the communists. They were internationalists and believed in getting along with all other countries. Their supporters were the workers. They blamed the Republic for the loss of World War I, and they hated the Weimar politicians for the famous stab in the back. The right wing believed in strong government and capitalism. They were a group of nationalists who put the nation above the individual. Their extremists were the fascists and the Nazis, and their supporters were businessmen, landowners, and military. After the humiliating loss of World War I, the German army was restricted to only 100,000 men because of the Treaty of Versailles. A lot of the soldiers were demobilized, and because they were so angry and frustrated, they joined paramilitary groups, or Freikorps. These groups were basically unofficial military groups. Now this is where the left and right wings come into play. Each side had their own paramilitary forces, so when one side was having a political meeting, the other would use their forces to sabotage it. Also, if say the communists were having a rebellion, the right side would use their military forces to put down the rebellion. One well-known example of when Freikorps were used was the Spartacist Uprising in 1919. From January 4th to the 15th of 1919, 100,000 communist extremists from the left wing occupied buildings in Berlin and wreaked havoc. The leaders were Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, who were the founders of the Spartacist League, which was a Marxist revolutionary movement. The Treaty of Versailles had left Germany's military extremely weak, so Ebert was powerless against this revolution. Being a group of 250,000 angry men who all hated the communists, Ebert turned to the Freikorps of the right wing to take down this communist rebellion. The revolution lasted a total of 11 days, and thousands of communists were killed and arrested by the right wing's Freikorps. The next big issue in the Weimar Republic was hyperinflation. After World War I, Germany owed huge debts to all the other countries because of the Treaty of Versailles. The reparation bill deprived them of their territory, ships, trains, military, factory equipment, natural resources, and their treasury was now empty and their currency was losing value. So what does the German government do to fix this problem? They begin to print more money, but this money is unbacked. They call it the paper mark. At the beginning, one of them equaled $4.2 US, but after they kept printing and printing it, 1 trillion of them equaled $1. Many know of the famous photos that were taken during this period, of children playing with blocks of money since they were worth less than blocks themselves. People even had to sweep the money from the streets since it was so worthless and there was so much of it. Others had to wheelbarrow money to go places because it took so many stacks just to buy a loaf of bread. People even resorted to burning money to keep their homes warm since it cost less than firewood itself. Luckily though, Germany's economy stabilized in 1924 when they had foreign help from America, who gave them loans. Germany was able to remain stable for the next 5 years until 1929, when the World Depression hit. The American stock market crashed and there were bank failures, so there was a recall on American loans to Germany. There was mass unemployment, and because of all the hardships and suffering, the people began to hate the Weimar Republic and blamed the whole thing on democracy. They began to turn to radical anti-democratic parties. Now this is where the Nazis stepped in. Promising to relieve these economic hardships, Hitler stepped in as Chancellor. Now that many hated and blamed democracy, the Republic's supporters were no longer the majority, and it was easy for the Nazis to not only gain more supporters but have more influence on the government. Hitler had already gained a lot of attention in events such as the 1923 Munich beer hall push, in which he tried to seize power in Bavaria and was arrested. His 24-day trial was widely publicized, and it gave him a huge opportunity to publicize his nationalist ideals to the rest of the world. It was while he was in prison for 9 months that he wrote his book, Mein Kampf, which was an autobiographical manifesto that basically told of his political ideals and his future plans for Germany. Another event that helped Hitler with his popularity was the October 1928 appointment of Alfred Hugenberg by the German Nationalist People's Party. Hugenberg wanted to be leader himself, but in order to further himself, he had to ally with the Nazis and Hitler. This alliance greatly benefited Hitler since Hugenberg controlled a media empire that contained newspapers that 50% of Germans read. Hugenberg simply put positive Nazi propaganda inside of respectable newspapers, and the Nazis were able to gain more attention and more supporters. Now that Hitler had finally gotten into the position of Chancellor, and the majority of the country despised democracy and the Republic, he simply needed that one push that would give him total control of the country. This push was known as the Reichstag fire, which occurred on February 27, 1933. On this day, the chamber of the Reichstag, or government base in Berlin, set on fire. Ironically, this was 6 days before the parliamentary election. Many strongly believe that the fire was set by the Nazis, but Hitler blamed it on the enemies of the state and made the most of the event to expand his power and make stricter laws. He created a decree that basically said that the fire was an attack by communist extremists who were against the state. President Hindenburg signed and released this decree. It caused millions of Germans to fear the threat of communist terror. This decree invoked the president's power in the Constitution, the emergency power, which, like I said, is extremely dangerous, and it allowed him to do anything for the sake of public safety without the government's consent. While the Nazi Party had started out as the minority in the Reichstag in 1928, only 4 years later it had the majority of the seats. There were also now 2 ways to bypass Parliament. There was first the extensive emergency power of the president, and second, the Enabling Act of 1933, which made it so that the Chancellor can create laws without involving the Reichstag. He used this to nullify many key civil liberties of German citizens. This ability was used to suppress publications that were unfriendly to the Nazi cause, and to give a legal basis to arrest anyone who opposed the Nazis, specifically communists. This was basically like the Espionage and Sedition Acts of the United States. With the support of President Hindenburg's emergency power and the Enabling Act of 1933, Hitler could now govern by decree without involvement of the government. Now having popularity and the ability to single-handedly run the country, the Constitution became irrelevant, the government disbanded, and the Weimar Republic crumbled to the ground, leaving the creation of a single-party state of Nazi Germany. Why was the Weimar Republic so important to history? Well, first of all, there are a lot of similarities to the United States. like the right and left wings of government. For the Weimar Republic, the left wing was the communists, while the right wing was the Nazis. For the United States, it can be said that the two wings are the Democrats and Republicans. Another similarity to the United States is that they both have huge debts, as well as no goods to produce, and the printing of money that is not backed up. And both follow the historical pattern of war plus debt equals downfall. In terms of the long-term significance of the Weimar Republic, it was the building block for Hitler coming into power and the creation of Nazi Germany. Without this crucial time period, the Holocaust may have never happened, and World War II as well.